I believe I am uniquely qualified to fill this position and run this office. And by saying that, I've been holding people accountable for decades, 17 of those as an elected official in the city of Rehoboth Beach. I've owned and operated a small independent pharmacy and also a retail store for 16 years. So I have an understanding of how to stay within means, how to look for waste and fraud, and deal with the profit loss. I've also been serving as an elected official for 17 years, and I currently do so. Last year, I uncovered about 62 change orders and $1 million in overages in a municipal complex that was already going over budget. I've worked on and fought for funding for $32 million projects where you're overseeing and looking at incentives and bonuses, and we're currently finishing up on a $52 million project. So I have that background, I have that governmental background, I have the small business background, but also the nonprofit as well. I've served on the Budget and Finance Committee for 17 years and chaired personnel and sit on the personnel again now, and other committees as well. Something else that I think is very important is nonprofit. I'm on the Delaware State University Board, Camp Rehoboth, which is for diversity and inclusivity in the state of Delaware, where everyone is welcome, as well as Meals on Wheels Lewis Rehoboth. I started as a driver about 20 years ago, and now I serve on the board and help them fundraise. So all of this brings a unique background, and you have to have certain skill sets to be able to manage an office and get consensus and work with people and be efficient. But something that people know about me is I actually have gotten results. I follow through on progress and processes. I make sure that, and it might take years, but I do follow through on the work that inspires me and motivates me. And I think, to put it in a nutshell, I'm not looking for a job, I'm looking to do a job. So hopefully I'll earn your respect and your vote on September 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gettis. Mr. Williams.
Thank you. I'm running for auditor to be the first Democratic auditor in quite a while. It's good to see so many folks that I recognize here from the many years that I have been involved in Democratic politics. And as was mentioned earlier, 22 years ago, when the party needed someone to step up and run for Congress because we did not have a candidate, I stepped up and did that. I've been a Democrat for 40 years. But this race is about experience, qualifications, knowledge, independence, and transparency. And I am the only candidate up here who meets all those criteria. Now, the experience and the qualifications, I think what we need for this office, which we have not had for 30 years, is a broad experience. We don't need just a narrow focus, but the broad experience that I would bring to this is a background in government accounting and government auditing. I worked for the Department of the Navy, uncovering fraud, waste, and abuse, and saving the taxpayers millions of dollars. Of private industry, I've worked for large corporations such as Sikorsky, implementing internal controls, doing what auditors do, as well as private industry and nonprofits. I'm currently working in a nonprofit, so I am the chief financial officer, understand that aspect of things. But working in the state government, as a state representative, on the budget committee, I sat on the other side of the table from the elected officials, from the agency heads. I knew what questions to ask. We grilled them on what was being done and where that money was going, and that's one of the things that the auditor needs to do. The other critical piece of this is being independent, as well as being transparent. Independence is very, very critical to this job. You need to go in and work for the people of Delaware, and that's what I want to do. Work for all of you, not for the special interests, and not for the elected officials. And that is why I have not sought or accepted, been offered a lot, but not accepted any endorsements from elected officials or agency heads. That is a contention in this race. The governor has come out and told me, when I talked, that as head of the executive branch, he cannot get involved because the auditor audits the executive branch. The auditor audits every branch, every commission, every board, every agency in this state. And so it is critical that the auditor be independent of thing I have strived to do in this race. Independent and experienced. That's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Davis.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone that helped put this on and for everyone that came out to hear about auditing. I'm very impressed with the turnout considering the topic, and I know that typically the auditor's race does not draw or garnish a lot of attention, but the very good thing about this coming year is that having so many candidates for the party has facilitated a lot of really robust discussion about what the state auditor does and what it can be in the future. So I'm very thankful for that. I am not your traditional politician. I've spent my whole life's career preparing for this race. And my background, the acronyms that were read after my name represent 20-some years worth of experience. And those alone are not enough. And I agree that leadership's important and management skills, but it's also the application and the understanding how to use government auditing standards and how to do investigations, how to work with oversight bodies such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the U.S. District Attorney's Office. And so these are things that I have done over decades, and that is my background. In addition, I started out in a union shop when I first was hired as an Auditor 1 at the beginning of my career, and I worked up through the ranks, and so I worked as a union person, but I also was promoted as a supervisor, and I worked with the union. And I understand that process, that went on to foster a good understanding of how to manage staff and what we need to do within all the auditing and professional standards. I've also applied some performance audit work in the state of Delaware. I've audited a lot of topics. It's taken me several years to get acclimated with the code and compliance issues within the state, and I would like to further that cause and work on follow-up and doing additional work that's necessary in the state of Delaware to make improvement. And so these are part of the overall objectives that I have for the office if I'm fortunate to be elected as the next auditor of accounts. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. We have received a lot of emails, which is absolutely fascinating. The auditor's race would actually get email questions from the public. So I'm going to go through all of those that sort of in reasonable categories. And then if we have time, I would like to open it up from the floor, and we'll just see what it is, how it goes. The first question came from Eric Morrison via email, and he writes, is experience in the specific field of state government auditing important for this position? Why or why not? We'll begin with Ms. McGinnis.
I think experience in general is important. There's a lot of people who are experienced. There's a lot of different professions that have experience. However, experience does not necessarily translate into being the best at that. We can have experiences, we can have doctors who they have a lot of experience. It doesn't mean they're a good doctor. So yes, it's important. It would be, when you are running this office, you have a chief of staff and a deputy. You are outsourcing a lot of the financial audits. There's only been about 4 performance audits in 8 years. There is a serious need for follow-up. So when I look at any kind of experience you can have that is pertinent, yes, that will be helpful. However, again, having experience and being able to take the vision to paper, to reality, and actually making sure you have a result, I think is key in any profession.
Mr. Williams.
I believe that this position requires an understanding and experience in accounting and auditing. If you don't have that experience and understanding, you simply can't understand what the office does and what the job does. So I have experience in U.S. government auditing and accounting, and I have experience, a wide range of experience in nonprofit accounting and in regular private industry business accounting. Those are the kind of critical things that you need. Having solely state auditing experience is not enough. That narrow focus does not give an individual enough of a background and enough of an understanding to do this job. We've had a non-accountant running this office for 30 years, and we've had other individuals who were specifically and solely working in state auditing. And the office has been a failure because you need that understanding of what private industry does. You need the understanding of working in nonprofit accounting as well to know what questions to ask, to know what to go after. There's a lot of things that have been missed under Auditor Wagner and even Ms. Davies when she was helping to run the office. And that's because the experience simply is not there. The experience to know what looks unusual, what happens, why are to raise these red flags. The audit of the Sussex Tech High School, which took 3 years to do. So many of red flags were there that were simply missed by the auditor's office. A lot of things that were just missed, that having that broad range of experience would have enabled the auditor's office to find something sooner.
Yes, I believe not only is experience necessary, but experience specific to state auditing. And I understand and have a lot of counterparts in the federal government. There is a distinct difference between federal and state auditing and accounting as well. The federal government uses a different set of accounting standards. Also, in state government auditing, and this is consistent with Delaware, we also do auditing within the local government venue. So state government auditing standards are the same standards that local governments follow. So it's very important to have that specific skill set to understand how to direct, even if you're going to contract a firm, you want to make sure you're getting your money's worth from that firm. You want to also participate in developing the audit programs and doing the risk assessment. So I would argue that your next state auditor, especially as small as the staffing is in the office, and with the problematic issues with turnover, and the last couple of years has been problematic for the state audit office, that it's important you have somebody that understands what is required under the standards and that can also train and develop staff so that we have institutional knowledge and we can keep our staff and that can fight for the salaries that are needed to stay somewhat marketable and encourage staff to stay and have a robust career within state government auditing. So I do believe the background is very important, and I also believe understanding how Delaware operates and things specific to Delaware finances and accounting and the accounting requirements and the financial audits, as well as the investigations and even the local operations is important as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. The second question comes from Kevin Olask via email, and he writes, as the state auditor must sign off on all reports that go out, what qualifications do you have to make sure that it is a quality report? We begin with Mr. Williams.
My experience as an accountant for 35 years, my experience as an auditor for the U.S. Navy, my understanding and having worked with auditors for my entire career, my position over the course of those many years has involved a lot of mergers and acquisitions, so I've been through many, many, many audits. I view the auditor as a resource, and so I talk to our auditors all the time. And obviously my background, experience, and my education in accounting covers auditing as well. So I have a clear understanding and experience in audit reports and what they mean, what the findings are, and how that's all represented. So I believe that my education, my accounting experience, my auditing experience provides me with the background and qualifications to review the audit reports and to sign off on those reports. Understanding the process of auditing. Now, my job at Sikorsky, part of my job at Sikorsky was the implementation of internal controls. And that is the biggest piece of what you're looking at in auditing an organization. Are those controls in place so that the money is not taken so that it's allocated to the right place, so that the controls are there to make sure that everything is going to where it's supposed to go, that everything is accounted for, both funds coming in and funds going out. We have a big problem in this state. Now, I've talked to a lot of people as I've gone up and down the state of funds that do not get to where they need to go after they've been allocated. We need a stronger staff with stronger qualifications and experience to be able to do that, and someone who can lead them in doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Well, Mr. Davis, Ms. Davis, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Signing the report is a very important part of the process, and having the background and qualifications to do that. I will have them from day one. I'm qualified under GAGAS. I have my continuing education credits up to date. I have the experience. I also understand the process used because I helped develop the process used in the office, how to abide by the standards and document those in the work papers, and also the electronic work papers that are used within the office. That's all very important. It's also important that in an effort to try to ensure in the state that we don't miss anything, and we're never going to catch everything. With 28 or 30 some staff, even in an audit shop that's had 1,000 staff, you're never going to catch everything out there, and there's always going to be work waiting for you. But it is very, very important that each and every report that goes out under the government standards, under the inspection standards, has to have the highest quality, because the worst thing you could do is put out a report that is not accurate or falsely accuses someone or is not in the proper state in order to support some sort of enforcement for those that use our report after they are done. So I am very cognitive of that, and there's a lot of effort put into making sure that a quality product is put out and that there's adequate levels of review before that product is put out, so that Delawareans can rely on that work product.
Mr. Gibbs.
Yes, with audits, again, I have the nonprofit experience. I've been on dealing with nonprofits and audits for about 20 years and served as treasurer of one that was national award winning in the U.S. Through Main Street in 2009 as a treasurer. Just recently dealt with an audit recently, and I think there's a lot of pieces to this, including the planning, the background, the scope, and the recommendations. So yes, you have to be familiar with it. The auditor of accounts will not be performing audits themselves. However, you do need to be familiar and have some recognition of the pieces that make it work. And yes, you want to put out something that's legitimate and meaningful to the Delawareans. But what good is it if there isn't any follow-up, and a report is only as good as it is if it sits on a shelf? What are we getting from that? What are we doing? What monies are we spending, taxpayer dollars, to get these findings? And then what are we doing with them? Because I believe that's a very large piece and component, not only to signing off on them, but making sure that the recommendations and helping to forward that vision of the recommendations, so there is follow-up also from that office as well.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbs.
I have a follow-up here, if I can, real quick. Because Ms. Davies mentioned releasing reports and having a full review before these final reports are released. There's a lot of unanswered questions, I think, regarding Ms. Davies' termination from the office and leaking of reports or confidential papers before it is a finalized audit. A finalized audit should be posted on the website, should be discussed with everyone who should be receiving those final reports. But I think we need to get some answers on the termination, on the violation of auditing standards that seem to lead to that. We haven't gotten any answers. And I think by mentioning that full review, it raises the question.
Thank you. Ms. Davies, you have raised your hand.
Briefly.
Yes.
I did abide by the standards. Chapter 7 of the professional auditing standards talks about including others, which have legitimate position and input into reports. The inspection and investigation standards includes that as well. And I had the professional judgment and the experience to do that. To think that we would never release something or never include someone in discussion in a position of authority into the input of the report and cooperate and make sure that the recommendations make sense and that we can have at least some potential to implement those recommendations is utterly ridiculous. And I did not violate the standards. I am well aware of what I did, and I have not denied sharing them, and it's been the practice nationally to do that. And I have nothing other to say than I'm very comfortable in maintaining my license, and I have not been called into question by my professional peers, which I would have been had I violated the standards.
Ms. McGinnis, you can have the last word if you'd like. No.
Thank you.
All right, next question comes again from Eric Morrison by email. From your work history or history of public service, can you describe a specific instance in which you highlighted waste, fraud, or abuse? Did any concrete improvement result from your efforts? We begin with Ms. Davis.
There have been, throughout my career, a number of issues, starting back when I was actually a supervisor, working in transportation and having what they called fee waivers, where there was a massive amount, and we looked for red flags, and we identified that and did performance audits on the system. And I've moved forward and done a number of them, including in Delaware, which is, in some cases, not that we want this to happen, but there have been some convictions of individuals that have perpetrated fraud. And they may sit in different places. They may be in fire companies, volunteer fire companies. They may be in particular schools. So I've had a long-standing history. The way we identify them can come through different vehicles. Your most common is through a tip, through someone that works within the organization, within state government, and can provide you substantive information that allows you to move forward and use those valuable audit investigative resources to try to focus in the right area, because there are oftentimes people that will send you down many rabbit holes out of grudge or revenge, and you have to make sure that you don't deploy too many resources following up on something like that and garnish enough information to know that you're moving forward properly and appropriately. Otherwise, you're contributing to the waste.
Ms. McGinnis.
As I said earlier, about a year ago, uncovering about 62 change orders to the tune of $1 million on a municipal complex, which has now led to a more transparent and accountable way for our $52 million project. So yes, thousands of dollars were saved there. And I believe now, because of the way we are doing business from the learning experience there. In nonprofit, in small business, and well as my municipal background, using technology, streamlining processes, which is more efficient, more effective, saving money, that has been a driver as well across all three venues. And in business, when you have a small business, you're always looking for waste and fraud, and how can I do this better and be more lean and more mean as a small business. So I've uncovered improprieties and issues where we have decreased waste, fraud, and abuse that have surfaced through certain individuals or practices. So I would say in the nonprofit, in the business, and in the municipal background, I have uncovered and implemented many practices that helped make concrete results in saving thousands, tens of thousands of dollars.
Thank you, Ms. McGinnis. Mr. Williams.
Thank you. Actually, I was involved, I'll give you three examples. One is in the federal government, state government, as well as private industry. I started with the U.S. Navy and was actually part of the team. If some of you may remember the $1,000 toilet seats and the $600 hammers that the government was buying. I was part of the group that uncovered that and investigated the root causes of those expenditures. The federal government, through defense contracting, was inefficient, and we were just wasting. The government was wasting millions of taxpayers' dollars, and that's what I helped uncover. While I was at Sikorsky, I butted heads with the management there because certain information was being withheld, because there were little checklists of turning the information in on time, and people were aware that numbers and forecasts had changed, but they did not report them because they didn't want to be marked as having turned something in an hour late. It was just wrong, and I was able to uncover that and make people aware of that. While I was serving in the General Assembly on the Bond Bill Committee, and this is why it is also critical to have someone with state government experience. On the Bond Bill Committee, we authorized funds to buy 2 new cranes for the Port of Wilmington, which would have provided jobs and kept the jobs that were there. Those funds, $10 million, were not spent because the administration at that time was trying to sell or lease the Port of Wilmington, and they were hoping that it would be done before they had to go out and buy that crane and they could redirect that money somewhere else. So that is, that is misdirection of funds. So those are 3 areas where I was directly involved with uncovering things that just were not right.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Anyone else? Okay, we'll go on the next one. The email from Kevin Rolak again. As Delaware is a small state, what would be your process if your office had to investigate someone you knew or are friends with? Again, with Mr. Gibbs.
I would begin the process of investigating that person that I was friends with or that I knew. I've been elected 17 years. I pride myself on not owing any favors. I'm very outspoken. I have no problem being the lone voice when I have been, and those who know me or bother to listen to my record or tapes from the city of Rehoboth and look at the credibility. I'm confident that once you get in that office, as I practice in my real life and as an elected official, you have to be an independent thinker. You have to do what's right. It's not a partisan job at the end of the day. It is a job where you are trying to make this office relevant, where we can save hard-earned tax dollars that are your dollars. Because as you know what our budget looks like. If I'm the only one that seems to show up at the year meetings, and I did all the expenditure review meetings as well under Markel. I'll tell you, there's a lot of trajectories that this state is not going to be able to go on, and we have X amount of funds, and the General Assembly, we have a budget, and that's what we have to make sure the money goes where the money's supposed to go. But people must be held accountable. Agencies that are eligible to be audited must be held accountable, and that's what I have done in my past, and I would continue to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Getz. Mr. Williams.
Independence is key, and I am the only candidate who has remained solely, completely independent in this race. I have not accepted the endorsements of any elected officials or agency heads or heads of any departments because it is critical. As I mentioned, even the governor has pointed out that he cannot get involved because he is the head of the executive branch. We talked to renowned professors from the University of Delaware and from the Wharton School who said that anyone accepting the endorsements and or financial help from elected officials who the auditor would be responsible for auditing under the law is compromised and cannot do the job. There's independence of fact and there's independence of appearance. For the people of Delaware to have confidence in the financial statements, confidence in where the state money is going, confidence that these numbers are correct and that you're looking out for the people of Delaware, you must be independent in appearance as well, which means accepting the endorsements of the Speaker of the House and other legislators, as candidate McGinnis has done, accepting the endorsements and help of other legislators, as candidate Davies has done, has compromised them both. I will investigate anybody because I don't know anything to anybody in this race. I have maintained from day one independence, and I have talked about independence from day one. You cannot do this job without that. We have seen for the past 30 years the auditor looking the other way. We cannot have that. There is a lack of confidence in those reports. There's a lack of confidence in the office questions were raised to the legislators, to others, look at these financial reports and these audits and believe in them and do anything? The answer is no, because they do not have confidence in the independence of the auditor.
Ms. Davis, I'll get you.
With respect to independence, I suppose the next state auditor could come up with their own definition or consult with a school, but my allegiance is to the government accounting standards, the OIG investigation and inspection standards, and to my professional accreditations. So one of the areas that I go to is the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And that's where I'm going to go to the standards and to the U.S. Government Accountability Office if there's a question of independence. And it is entirely possible that under those professional standards that there could be a circumstance. For example, if there was a family member that was working at a firehouse and there was an allegation that came forward, and I would have to recuse myself. The process in the office when I left was that annually we fill out a disclosure form, and at the beginning of each engagement, we attest to our independence and that we can operate with a clear, objective mind and leave our biases out of any of the work, which everyone is subject to having some sort of bias. And then at the conclusion of the engagement, we have to test off on that again, and that will be the process in the office. In the event that I do have some sort of conflict, we will make sure that we hire someone professionally that's able to come in and perform that last level of review and work through that consulting with the United States Government Accountability Office.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
I do, it's been said a few times, and I think to be fair, I'm sure everybody out here knows it as well, but just to be fair, the auditor does not go and audit the General Assembly or John Carney. I'm assuming he stays out of primaries as he always has. I didn't go and ask him and talk to him about this race for me, so I understand you have, because you've told us several times, but we should be truthful that you're not auditing the General Assembly or the government.
Okay, Mr. Williams?
No, that's okay.
Okay, we're going down the table, so we'll take you, Mr. Williams.
The auditor audits the executive branch. The governor is the head of the executive branch. The auditor audits every department and agency in the state. The legislators have a vested interest. They introduce legislation. They vote on the budget bill. They are involved. Are we going to look the other way when something comes up with the state police because a legislator supports the state police? Are we going to look at the other way when it comes to a school because a certain legislator supports certain education policies? That's the problem. Politics is also optics. People have a lack of confidence in their government by setting an example. And that example, you need to lead by example. We need to show that we are completely independent. And if you are getting that support from certain legislators or other legislators, people see that. There are questions. It raises doubt in people's mind.
Fine, Mr. Williams.
Thank you.
Ms. Davis, you want to say anything?
Yes, just briefly. The concept of completely, totally, entirely independent, we all have some sort of interrelationship. I mean, we get our money from a process. So one of the first things that a state audit shop has done whenever they do a job, they do it well, is they get their appropriations cut. And that's where you have to be able to go over and stand up and publicly release that information. So there's always going to be a certain amount of back and forth, whether your state auditor is elected or whether it's appointed. There's always going to be an opportunity for someone to push back when they don't like the topic that you're auditing or you're going to investigate.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. The next question from April Moore by email was directed at Ms. Davis. If you were wrongly terminated, why not share the independent auditor's report that was done? The newspaper article mentioned it existed, but that hasn't been shared.
So the question didn't express what they're looking for when they talk about an independent auditor's report, but I can say that since I was out of the office and I'm responding to whatever was presented to me as something that I did wrongly, I've gone through the process and I've had the first of big hearings in the UI, and it was was represented that they did not have sufficient charges. I don't have work products that are mine. They're not, legally I have no work product out of that I'm entitled to release. And I am cooperating fully and under the code of conduct. I cooperated when I continued to be a state employee. If there's a question about some specific audit, they need to go to the auditor's office and those that have oversight over that, or put a FOIA in with the AG's office.
Mr. Williams.
I think there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. Why? What was the grounds of the termination? Are you disputing that? Are you publicly saying this was not right, or it was? Or, you know, not releasing and being honest and direct with the voters is a problem. You're asking all of us as voters to trust you, but you're not trusting us with the information. So I think there are a lot of open questions here. And the one process with the Department of Labor and the unemployment findings, because there was not enough evidence, I think one part of that was that you may have had certain authority to make a decision, but the Department of Labor was not qualified really to determine whether those decisions were correct. So I think it's still all up in the air, and I think we need answers.
Ms. McGinnis.
No comment.
Mayor?
Ms. Davies, go ahead.
Yes, I do. I mean, Mr. Williams wants to say that the UI attorney that oversaw that hearing was not qualified. And I think that's something that he needs to take up with the Department of Labor, that he's going to call their credentials, their background, and the time and effort that they spent in that hearing. And it was considerable. If they're going to disqualify, he's going to refute them and now rip their credentials down and their background and their experience. What is ever going to serve as sufficient evidence for Mr. Williams or others that just want to keep rehashing the issue? I am going through the process, and as there's public information that can be made available, I'm sure that will become available, but I'm continuing on with the process, and I'm cooperating with oversight bodies that are doing investigations.
Thank you, Ms. Davies. Next question is from Kevin Olat. Are Delaware's laws regarding education funding strong enough to protect from fraud and abuse? Ms. McGinnis.
No, and I think there's room for improvement. I spent the weekend going through some previous audits. I believe with education, we know we spend close to $17,000 a child, which is 6th highest in the nation, but is that money really going to the children? I believe that there was an audit with, well, I can't say the word, not job description, but anyway, there was something related to education with the job performance, or and it has not been followed up to my knowledge, I don't believe. So there's there's a lot of room for improvement everywhere, in any agency you touch. I don't believe anyone can say there isn't a way to do something more efficient, more effectively. I believe that all of us want the money to go to the children, and we want it to go quickly because we have issues. I'm glad of certain legislation that's happened recently with some of the funding for the K through 3 with the basic special ed level. But I will tell you that I think, again, at the end of the day, we can pump out audits out of this office, like the past administration and team has done. But if we don't do anything with them and act upon them or follow up and make sure that those red flags are being addressed, it's no different than, okay, I have 30 seconds. It's no different than going into a restaurant and finding mice and then finding out, are you going to go back and check on it, the health department? Or are you just going to let it go and come back in a couple of years? No, and that's what's happening. That's what's been the product out of that office for the past 8 to 10 years. And we deserve better. You deserve better for your tax dollars, if you care how they're spent.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
I don't think the laws are strong enough, but we're not getting the information we need to determine that either. For many years, quite some time ago, the school districts were not even being audited on a regular basis. The code requires all the agencies and departments to be audited every 2 years, but the school districts every single year. And it hasn't been done. And part of that is the staffing in the office over the last 30 years has drastically dropped by 2/3. There were 57 people 30 years ago. There are now around 20. And over the course of that time, the state budget doubled to $4.25 billion. And almost a third of that is education. And so we're not able to see what's really going on. We don't have enough data, we don't have enough information for the legislature, for the governor, to make informed decisions or informed recommendations. I mean, I was there for 6 years, and we did not have an auditor's office that was giving us what we really needed in order to move those processes forward. So yeah, we do need to do a much better job at controlling where this money is going, so that it does get into the classroom, so that it is not misdirected. But we need to make sure that we have the adequate staffing in order to do what's legally required of the office, which is including auditing all the school districts and making sure that we are auditing all of those schools and the charter schools as well. That should be done and overseen by the state auditor. We're not getting enough funding and staffing in order to do the job that is necessary to make the right decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Davies.
I want to make sure I answer the question. It's about, can there be laws to ensure that there is no fraud? There can be improvement in laws to help improve the processes, but not everything can be legislatively addressed. There is a need for a culture that ensures that fraud is not acceptable. It's a tone at the top, and that resides with the branch of government and the agency heads. And you have to remember that the auditor's office, there's a lot of discussion about the auditor's going to make this happen, the auditor's going to make that happen. We cannot dictate legislation. We can represent, testify, and talk about facts and circumstances that we found that existed, but we have no enforcement power. The minute you start to make management decisions, you lose your independence. So a lot of the discussion here today is very disconcerting because it is, in some cases, a direct violation of the professional standards. We have to make sure that we stay objective and we do not make those decisions. We do not participate in processes, putting processes in place. So there's a particular professional way that we go about constructing recommendations to empower the agencies and departments. And that would be the same for fraud or any other type of process or improvement that we would recommend as a result of our audits, investigations, or even consulting or training that we would sit down and have a discussion about perhaps even some best practices. We have to be careful not to cross the line.
Ms. McGinnis.
I do believe it's something that Ms. Davies said is correct, and we should all really think about that. And it's called the tone at the top, because it does start at the top. So I believe that office is the heart, and that office has spokes, which are the agencies and the entities it needs to audit. But if the office needs to be at full complement and also needs to be functioning properly with good morale and like a well-oiled machine and accountable and transparent itself, to be able to ask that and recommend that of all these agencies as well. So I think there's some work to be done in that office, and it's under 20 people already. So I believe that this is an opportunity, and being positive is looking forward. It's not what the office was, it's what it can be, should be, and could be.
Yeah, two things. I want to clarify that I am not saying that the auditor has any enforcement and is telling anyone what to do. But the auditor, by doing a proper audit and being transparent and making sure all of this information is publicly available, is providing the data that is needed. And because that has not been done consistently, that data is not there. So that's the point I want to make there. But yes, the leadership at the top. We need, the biggest source of information regarding what's happening in state government is state employees. They need to have confidence that if they report something to the auditor's office, that there will be follow through. And I don't believe, I've talked to a lot of people and state employees over the past several months. They don't feel that they're necessarily being listened to or that something is going to come of what they are reporting. or that it will happen in a timely manner. So that is, that's where the leadership comes in to make sure they're confident that something will happen.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Davies, last word.
Yes, I'd like to respond to if you're a legislator for 2 years, 6 years, 4 years, you need to communicate with the state auditor, no matter who that is. And that's one thing, if anyone had called me a legislator, a senator, as I spoke earlier, I'd sit down and talk to them and be responsive, or a taxpayer. There needs to be communication, and we need to figure out what information is necessary for those legislators to make decisions. And I am in full agreement on that, but the legislator also has to be willing to pick up the phone, have those meetings, have those discussions. And there are many of them out there that have done that, and I'm sure will continue to do that regardless of who's elected into the office.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davies. Next question from Anna Marina Hurley is directed to Ms. Davies and reads, how will you effectively lead an office of staff that reported you for wrongdoing, and how will you ensure there isn't retribution against those people?
There's a inherent assumption there that everybody in the office was involved in something that was against me, and that's simply not true. And as I talked about earlier, I went to my unemployment hearing, and I'll continue on with the process. There are plenty of good people left, even though they did lose 2 of the 4 CPAs as managers since I've left the office. And they've lost a lot of staff since I left the office. But the number one important thing will be, if you want to be a public servant, like I have dedicated my career, and I knew many of the people in that office to be dedicated public servants that really wanted to make a difference. If you want to do the work under the standards, and you want to come in and provide the service every day, as opposed to politicking or doing your second business or whatever the case may be, everything is going to be fine in the office, because that's what I advocate for, that we're going to follow through and be good public servants. And I believe there are still people in the office, I know that to be true, that are interested in doing such work.
Ms. McGinnis.
No comment.
Ms. Williams.
I'll just comment on my experience that I have led a team of 30 accounting professionals, financial managers, and IT professionals as well. So I hope that if I have the opportunity to lead that office, I will be able to use my leadership style of collaboration and encouraging the employees to learn more, to advance within their position, and provide a workplace environment where people feel comfortable and feel that there is a path for them forward to perform public service and to advance in their career. So that's it.
You know what? I will chime in.
Mr. Williams, are you finished?
Yes.
Yeah, you should know I've had 2 small businesses, and I was awarded Business and Professional Women's Employer of the Year. I did pay a livable wage and benefits and did not take a salary myself for 3 years. But I took care of my employees. Very inclusive, very diverse, and I don't consider myself a politician. My husband always jokes with me and says it costs me to be a city Rehoboth commissioner because I make a whopping $56 a month. And I can tell you, I've already spent about 6 hours today volunteering, going to people's homes and helping businesses who are having an issue with a permit or what have you. There's a lot of multiple hats going on. So I never consider myself a politician when you're truly putting in 20, 30 hours a week and sometimes getting up in the middle of the night and going, oh, let me write that down on my computer. So I'd like to make that clear, and I've always allowed opportunity and policies to allow people to rise to the top in my businesses.
Ms. Davies, you got a last word?
No, I just advocate for doing the work of the people and trying to provide the best product under the standards and evaluating what is the appropriate course of action. Once you start open a case, you follow through and you finish it. And that's the commitment. We also need to make sure that the staff is trained and that they're provided opportunities. And if they do leave us, hopefully they'll go to another state agency or department and better themselves, versus going into outside the state government.
Thank you. Next question is from Eric Morrison by email. Bryce, please name a specific instance in which your professional or ethical standards were put to the test. How did you handle it? Begin with Mr. Williams.
I'm going to use the same example of Sikorsky. It's a large corporation, part of United Technologies. There's a lot of demands in order to get quarterly earnings turned in on time. And there was manipulation of the numbers. Things were simply not being reported, but that was the way things were done. And Sikorsky had some issues before in the past about inflating their revenue by shipping things out one day and then returning them on the truck the next day. So there should have not been that problem that existed, but it still continued. And the numbers that we had information on, that we knew had changed, that should have been reported, that would have altered the quarterly earnings, were not done. And I pushed back against that. It did not win me any friends there, but it was the right thing to do. And so that is something that I've done throughout my career, is making sure I stood up and did the right thing according to the rules and according to just ethics and what's morally correct.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Davis.
When I look back at my career, the most difficult time that comes back to me readily was when I was a supervisor in Pennsylvania in the audit shop there, which was over 800 employees, 500 some staff. And the state auditor's elected position at the time, it was a stepping stone office. It was considered something that was a 2-year term limit. And I was requested specifically to come in and look at an area because the next office for that state auditor was a target of an audit. And so I was very concerned that someone was trying to use my expertise in a way that might have been inappropriate, or they had inappropriate expectations. And so I went into the front office, what we call the front office, and spoke to the state auditor, which was very rare, and said, if you want somebody to target or provide you with something for the next election, I'm not your person. And please, if you want to keep me on staff, I think you need to release me from this, or understand that I will only report what I find under the standards. And so I found that to be the most difficult, particularly given the gap between me and the elected official at that time.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Dennis.
Yes, I would think in every venue, in every hat I've worn, starting as, waiting tables or cleaning houses when I was, in college. So they're always put in a situation where, hey, don't claim those tips, or can you not share that information? As an investigator, I was calling a certain tier level of information and asked to withhold some things. So I think everyone is put in that position, and sometimes it could be on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Just that's life. You're always asked to compromise, and it's your character that you have to stand up for. And I'm proud to say that I've done the right thing. I've had businesses, I've also managed them, and sometimes you have renegade employees that are going to go do what they want to do, or try and change the rules along the way to make them suit, their profession or their job description. So, you have to have a stomach for it. You have to have the thick skin, and you also have to be tough, fair, and independent, and be able to stand up to whatever confronts you. And I've lived my life that way. I've been an elected official that way. I volunteer that way, and I've run businesses that way. So.
Mr. Williams, you want to respond?
I just want to add one real quick thing that falls into this too, with political challenges as well. When the Markell administration and Secretary Levin were attempting to sell, or at least the Port of Wilmington, for what was truly a bad deal, they were misleading the public. And I challenged Secretary Levin at a hearing and pointed out, because I understood the numbers, that he was double counting the expenses in their P&L statement. He was counting things twice to make the board look worse than it was, and they backed down. Now, once again, the governor was not thrilled by that and was quite angry for quite a while, but I was not going to let that go through because it meant the loss of a lot of jobs.
Anyone else? Thank you. This is the last question of those that were submitted by email. I have 3 here that have been submitted from the audience, and 2 others which came in but which were not signed. Well, looks like they've just been signed. Thank you. All right. The last question of our email is from Eric Morris again. Do you have any political ambitions beyond the office that you are currently seeking? We will begin with the statements.
No, this is the ultimate career position. I would not do anything but state auditing, and I have no aspirations to run for any other office in the state of Delaware.
Ms. McGinnis.
I'm focused on this job, this office, and making it relevant. I believe if I can't do a good job, if I'm elected in 4 years, then don't vote for me again. I don't make decisions worried about getting votes. I've been elected, I'm in my 6th term. But this is the focus. I think there's a real opportunity here, and I know it's dwindling with staff, but here it's also becoming something where it's almost like a starting place, where we can get back to what we're supposed to be doing, make sure the proper policies and procedures are in place, and start looking for ways to save tax dollars as they're out there.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis. Ms. Boyce.
No, I came back from, after leaving as a state representative, thinking that I was done with all this, working for a nonprofit, working for a library, doing something I really enjoyed. But a lot of people asked me to come back and do this because they felt that I had the experience in accounting, in auditing, and in state government, and that I knew how to do this. In fact, when I was in the legislature in 2010, I was asked to run for state auditor, and I declined that because I had made a commitment to the people of my district. I was approached again in 2014 and said then that I had made a commitment to my district. And so I was not about to jump from one office to another simply for personal ambition. I was elected to do a job, and I was going to stay and do that job for as long as the voters chose to have me there. Now, that's why running for this office is done just out of a commitment to public service, to do what is right, and because I felt that in this race that I was the most qualified. And so that's why I'm in this, and I'm in this to do what is right for the people of Delaware in this office.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. We're now going to go to questions submitted from the audience. I'd like 2 people, please, who have submitted questions but have not given their full name. I think it's only appropriate that the persons who are asking a question put their name on it. So it's Will and Angie W. Would please come up, or else I'm going to discard your question. Is Will or Angie W. here? Would you please identify yourself so I can put this on the question? Watkins. Thank you. And Will Garfinkel is the other person. Thank you, Mr. Garfinkel. Okay. First question from Buffy Thomas. How do you work with other elected officials to advance the needs of the auditor's office, especially increasing staff and audit? Well, where did we end up the last time? The first person on that was Ms. Davies, so we'll go to Ms. McGinnis.
I would increase the staff and work forward because if elected in November, I will have Plan A, B, and C ready to go by the time I'm sworn in, and have plans ready to go to JFC. And because I do have endorsements and relationships with the General Assembly, those who are standing behind me know me. and know that I work hard and have results and believe in me, and I'm honored to have that support, to be quite honestly, because they believe in me and they're attaching their name to me. So with that, I would go to them and fight for funding, fight for resources, but be able to say, check on me. This office is looking at metrics for everyone else, then this office itself should be accountable and transparent and be held to a same standard and have to prove this is what I've done and be able to show the metrics that there is some success. So the next year they can believe in you again and you can go back to JFC and ask for more funding.
Mr. Williams.
I believe that I have the experience to present a compelling case to the Joint Finance Committee of the needs for the increased staffing by using the skills I've developed over the years of putting those presentations together, the cost-benefit analysis, the return on investment, to clearly show that if the auditor's office is run properly with the right leadership, that we will be able to save the taxpayers money. We will uncover fraud, waste, and abuse. We will find ways and make recommendations to be more efficient. And is that cost savings of taxpayer dollars that I will be able to show with data as a compelling argument to increase the staff. It is not about who endorsed you and whether they helped you before. That's not how it gets done. I was on the Joint Capital Infrastructure Budget Committee. There are two money committees in the House, JFC and Bond Bill, the capital side of it. You come to that meeting and you sit down and face the elected officials and you make a case. It's not because you got an endorsement and because you're friends. It does not work that way. You need to prove, because at the end of the day, you are responsible to the people of this state and to your district. And if you go back and say, well, I increased that because, I'm friends with a certain office holder, it just doesn't hold water. You need to make a compelling case, and that is what I've done throughout my career as a budget director as well, to large organizations. And if you provide that, if you provide the data and the information, then, and show that we will save money for the taxpayers, that we will generate those savings that they'll use somewhere else, then that is how you make your case.
Thank you, Ms. Davis.
So I do want to speak to the funding for the office. The funding, there's always been payroll funds reverted back. There was ample funding that was obtained for the positions that they had, and we didn't request any more positions than we could fill. When I left the office, we were one shy of full complement. It is very important, though, to fill those positions, and I believe the question related to how we would work with other state government auditors, and I can even elaborate further. I think it is important to have a rapport with other state government auditors, and part of my history has been to work on both not-for-profit organizations that deal with federal, state, and government training specifically for government investigators and auditors. And so I think involvement in those types of professional organization is very important. Plus, I have a background on various committees nationally for performance auditing and quality control reviews, so on and so forth. And so our staff needs to be exposed to that and brought into those experiences in order to communicate and have professional development and form their own professional judgment, so that everything isn't about the small office of Delaware, but there's a perspective, a bigger perspective, that there are many different ways to effectively do auditing and investigating. So I would advocate for interaction at the federal, state, and even local government auditing level.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Next question is submitted by John Lankus and reads, in your view, how has the Single Audit Act of 1984 as amended impacted the manner and way that the Office of Auditor of Accounts now has to conduct its audits? Mr. Williams. Would you like me to read that back? It's a little bit.
Yeah.
In your view, how has the single Audit Act of 1984 as amended impacted the manner and way that the Office of Auditor now has to conduct its audits.
That's the extent of,
How has it impacted?
how's it impacted?
I guess I'll make up my idea of this, and then that is, do you think that the law was well written and is being well executed now, or are there problems with it that need to be addressed?
I'm not sure exactly what what's happening within the office and what the requirements are being met or not by what they're doing. It has to do with internal controls and all of that, and federal funds and state funds. I don't have an answer for that one right now.
Fair enough. Ms. Davis.
It's evolved quite a bit since 1984. It is a federal mandate. It is not something that is imposed upon us within Delaware law or code. It is definitely something that will always be present as long as there is the guidance out there. It's now called the Uniform Grant Guide. It's evolved over the years. They took the A123 and A133 and all the various other supplements and requirements, and they put them into one. It's been in effect now for, I believe it's been 2 years now, and it is a very detailed type of auditing, but it is required in order to get and maintain that federal funding, and there is a lot of interaction at the federal level, both with those at the OIG office that oversee the audit process and the programmatic people, and it covers a lot of the Code of Federal Regulation at the federal government level. So it's very technical, very detailed, but it's important that it's done annually and that it's done correctly, and that is throughout all aspects of government within Delaware that roll into the state financial statements.
Thank you. Ms. McGinnis.
I will agree with Ms. Davies, and then add a couple things there. I've dealt with the federal agencies and our municipal audits as well on multiple projects over the past 17 years. And again, as these codes change and evolve, it does leave some room for unintended consequences. However, things are being put in place. This is very, very technical. So things are being put in place that are to improve the way we do business overall and how we interact with some of these federal monies. But again, to maintain the federal funding. However, I will just say there's sometimes unintended consequences that do come and follow with new codes and regulations.
Ms. Davis, you have something to add?
Yes, I'll keep it brief. The first time I came to work on the federal audit, which was commonly referred to as a single audit, was the first time and the only time in my career where I said, I didn't feel comfortable with a finding, and I wanted to use my professional judgment, so we had to call the federal oversight body and ask them if we were allowed to either somehow reduce or not produce a finding, and they said no. There were certain things at the federal level that they were absolutely looking for. So if they were looking for that square peg in the square hole, it didn't matter if management had come up with a better process that we needed to report on that finding. And I went back and I asked, they said there were certain things that they were measuring out there across the United States, and they wanted a consistent reporting of that issue. So it was interesting to me that there would be a time where you could not exercise your professional judgment. You have to follow things to the letter of the guidance.
Yes. I'm not going to throw out all the rules, regulations, and numbers of what changed and what did not. The question, though, was how does it impact the office? The reason I don't know is I'm not sure what the staffing levels are and who's assigned to do what and that's the question. How does it impact? Do we have enough people? I don't know if anyone outside of the office, because they don't even post their staffing and what's going on now, knows exactly what those impacts are. How has it changed? What happens in the office? Who's been redirected? Do we have the proper mix of people? And that is not something that's available to us to even be able to answer that question. The only person who can answer that question is someone who's worked directly in that office. Doesn't mean that that's better or worse, but we need to know an answer to that as well. What has changed in the office, and why was not, if there was a negative impact, what was changed? Or was anything changed? We just haven't seen, we've just seen decreasing staff over the years.
Okay, so, thank you, Steve. Ms. Davis, last word.
Yes, the reports are annually posted on the Auditor of Accounts website. They are critical and they are contracted. While I will agree that it would be very helpful to have a state auditor that understood what the firm is doing and be able to guide them and ensure that we have things done cost effectively, because just before I had left, we did do some cost savings and reorganize things and actually had them rely on other work that was done annually so that we could reduce the level of work and put some of the resources elsewhere, because there's a heavy burden on school districts and people that pay for these audits, because the contracted audit is paid for under the single audit through the agencies and departments, so it's important that we're fiscally responsible with that contracting. But the information is available, it's out there for everyone to see which firm does that work annually.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Next question comes from Patrick Jackson. What needs to be done legislatively or constitutionally to strengthen the auditor's office? Ms. Davis?
I believe that the legislation could use some updating, and we could also use some additional professional staff from a legal perspective. There is a restriction that we have to go to the Attorney General's office, and we do not have a position of a legal counsel, which is different from other states, and oftentimes it can cause concerns about who's providing us counsel who already recommended advice to agencies and departments. That may be one area that we want to talk to the legislators and people that oversee that. It's also something that we would talk to whoever becomes the Attorney General. There are some outdated mandates that are out there that we've dealt with annually through some processes to try to get them done as efficiently as possible, but they may want to consider dropping some of them that have been out there for maybe 50, 60, 70 years, and they're no longer perhaps of great importance, and we can fill that work with something else that provides information for legislators. But that's really going to be for legislators to decide what they want the office to do, and the taxpayers.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Gettis?
Again, I'm very optimistic, and as far as strengthening that office in any manner that's legislative, absolutely. Again, there's room for improvement. When you look at under Title 29, it's a little antiquated what the code reads right now. But there's a lot of opportunity. I don't think any of us up here are psychic, so we're not going to know who's going to be left in that office by the time this general election is won. It could be down to 8 people by then. So we need to get together. You need to get in that office, regroup, see what's there, see what's needed, and see what can go forward. Yes, there are a lot of audit mandates out there that are not finished and have been left hanging. I was at the last year listening to one about authorized positions. And so there's a lot of opportunity. Again, you must have that relationship with the General Assembly where you can talk to them and make recommendations, and perhaps they can forward the legislation or sponsor some legislation if they see fit and they believe in your recommendations and that it needs to really press forward. As far as cost saving, efficiency, streamlining, or getting money to the patient or the child or what have you, whatever the topic may be.
Thank you, Mr. Gettis. Mr. Williams?
I think more than relationships with legislatures, you need an understanding of the state code to see what needs to be done or what suggestions or recommendations to make. We need to look and see how much of the organization of the office is dictated strictly by code and how much of it is the structure of what the budget request is. For example, as a legislator, I sponsored the bill that came from Delaware to reorganize Delaware, because they could not simply move one position from one department to another department. It was very, very detailed on what positions fit into what departments. That was a reorganization that required legislative action. Now, how much can be done within the department of the auditor's office may not require additional legislation. The auditor's office has a lot of power that has simply not been used. The auditor has subpoena power, but has not been using that. So we need to also look at conflicts in the code. And it's not up to the auditor to say how it should be, how that conflict should be resolved, but to really point that out. For example, the issue of charter schools and whether the charter school board of directors can choose their auditor or whether the state auditor gets to choose the auditor. Title 29, Chapter 29 says that the auditor has the power to choose auditors for any engagement. Title 15 for education, is 15 or 19, says that a charter school board can choose their own auditor. There's a conflict between those two. So do you go at that point to the Attorney General's office, ask for clarification? If they can resolve it, that's good. If not, then you have to tell the legislature they need to fix it.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Ms. Davis, you indicated you wanted.
Yes, having worked in the office and consulting with our Deputy Attorney General over the years, I am aware that the Auditor's Office subpoena power is outdated. So the Auditor of Accounts does not have effective subpoena power, so we always went through the Attorney General's office to obtain our subpoenas and have them issued. It's very cumbersome. We did try to address that. There was no remedy through the legislator, but it is something that should be looked at again. However, it was helpful to work with the attorneys up there, so we would need our own attorney in order to issue those subpoenas directly, because we don't practice law. We need to use attorneys to practice law.
Yes, Williams? Thank you. Well, the next question comes from Jody Sweeney. The state auditor's office is not solely responsible for the financial health of state agencies. What other areas do you see that the auditor should be involved in with respect to state agencies? Begin with Ms. Gibbs.
As I said earlier, I believe there's been 4 performance audits in 8 years. That is the trend. That's a national trend. And looking at best practices, you get more results. They're quicker, they're cheaper, they're more direct, and they make an impact. And I believe that that's something that could be implemented and used more regularly. I also think that I believe, again, I'm just going to go on this. There is opportunity moving forward. I really believe the past is the past, the neglect is the neglect, the not follow up, the things that have happened, we could have done better, and there's always room for improvement. And so looking forward, I would like to look at best practices. As I've talked to other auditors across the country, and actually have an endorsement from one from the state of Pennsylvania, who has 450 folks under them. It's about looking forward. Look at the people they're hiring. Look at the job descriptions of who's being hired, and the backgrounds that are necessary. Look at what their offices are looked at and look like, because a lot of our agencies are working in silos. They're not communicating. There's a lack of uniformity. There's a lack of consistency. All of this, we can work forward and make a real difference and a real change, but none of this is going to happen until that office itself gets its feet back on the ground and decide what the vision's going to be and how it's going to move forward.
Ms. Wood.
Could you read the question again?
Right. The state auditor's office is not solely responsible for the financial health of the state agencies. What other areas do you see the auditor being involved in with respect to state agencies? If you want, you can rephrase that.
The first sentence again, because it's
state auditor's office is not solely responsible for the financial health of state agencies.
The auditor is not really responsible for the financial health of the state agencies. It's the legislature and the governor who are making sure that there is a budget and that we have adequate tax revenues and everything is balanced. The auditor is responsible for making sure that the rules are followed, that the internal controls are in place and followed. And that is the primary function of the auditor's office, so that people have confidence in the financial statements of the state, that our bonding our agencies where we are borrowing have confidence in the financial statements of the state. So it's really the reporting and the auditing and showing that we are adequately and correctly tracking the income and expenses and that they're going to the right places. So that is what the auditor is doing. In addition to that, we talked about performance audits and making recommendations. Part of the code does say to make recommendations to the legislature. So it is in that vein that we are then tasked, if we had adequate staff, to look at how things are being done and how operationally things could be improved upon. Well, once again, those are just findings and data and the recommendations, but the auditor's office does not have the authority or the power to implement those or to enforce those recommendations into effect.
Thank you. Ms. Ayers.
It is true that the auditor's office cannot dictate or mandate any kind of fiscal approach to things, but it is important that we work towards ensuring that the financial records have some sort of reliability and dependability for those that are going to use that information. There are various ways that we can get at that, and we've talked about that all here today, all of us have, we talk about investigations, shoring things up, trying to ensure that we catch fraud or that we report on it, supporting those that have the enforcement power, sitting down talking to legislators. And I want to talk a little bit more about performance auditing, because we've been talking very abstractly about that. And it's important to know that those audits, the last one that was done was not but days before I left the Office of Auditor Accounts. It's no longer on the website, it was brought down. And it evolved around some very important issues with education and additional work on the educational process and what's called the unit count process. Those audits are very expensive. They are not the cheapest type of audit. Nationally, I have been working on the Performance Audit Committee for over a decade prior to me leaving the office, and I've also judged performance audits nationally, and I can tell you the hours are into the thousands, tens of thousands, for each individual performance audit that's done. So you have to make sure that we're deploying the resources in an appropriate area and that we're getting what we need out of it, and then do the follow-up on that work. The follow-up is very important.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Any comments? Ms. McGinnis.
Yes, I understand certain things are expensive, and looking at best practices of performance audits is the trend of what we're doing with that money. And yes, recommendations, I understand we cannot force them to happen, but we can certainly inspire and motivate with our General Assembly through legislation and using best practices. The whole thing with the agency now and the trend is collaboration. It's partnerships. It's working together. You're going to DelDOT and going, okay, I'm not going to audit the entire DelDOT. It's going to take me 2 years. Where you have an issue, you pinpoint that. It's quicker, it's faster, and you can get results. So I believe working with the agencies, to your question, it is about partnerships and looking at best practices and how it will work here.
I was going to say, you can't go to DelDOT and say, well, we're not going to audit it this year, we'll do a performance audit. Say, legally, we have to. I mean, we have to do the audits. We can go beyond that, but we can't substitute one for the other. The code is clear. We need to perform those audits. That's the #1 responsibility. That has to be done first. Saying that we can do a cheaper or faster performance audit, simply, you can't.
It is true that we have to do a certain amount of audits annually. There is no swapping it out. It would be devastating financially to the state of Delaware because of the bond rating. And it's also, I think it would curtail the information that's used by the legislators and oversight bodies. So we need that for various reasons. But I think the concept of performance auditing can be used in various locations. Corrections, there's a lot of people calling for Department of Corrections, more auditing in the school districts, but it's going to require some judgment calls, because whenever you have a lot of information about something that deals with fraud, you may not necessarily choose a performance audit over an investigation, because you're working towards supporting that oversight, that enforcement body, and determining if you can get restitution for that money too. That's also something that you want to make available for whoever's going to follow through with the report results. So I think that's an important thing when you consider what type of engagement you're going to use. And there are also some other types of engagement that are available under government auditing standards that we haven't even talked about here today.
Just because you want to direct to a third round, so we'll do that in a minute.
No, yes, and we are, the auditor's office is responsible to be auditing different agencies, school districts. However, if we all recognize in the past, 10 years or so, everything that should have been happening was not happening, and what was happening was not followed up on necessarily. So that's why we are where we are, and I would like to say, I do believe that we should be looking at performance audits strongly as it's working in the best practices in the U.S. and taking, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but we can look at what other states are doing and what works, and then kind of tweak it so it could be a possibility for Delaware.
I'll just say again that given our resources and priorities, and the priorities are set in law, we have to do the financial auditing first. Now, over time, we need to present a comprehensive plan, cost benefit and return on investment, to the legislature to show that, one, we have to increase the staffing or fill the positions that are there to do the basic requirements of the job, which is the financial audits, which are necessary for bond ratings and legally required. But then we extend that out to say, this is the staff we will need to begin to do more performance auditing. It's not an overnight thing. In fact, it's not going to change overnight because the first budget will already be set. But you have to be aware of the budget process and how that works. You're also not going to add 20 people to the office overnight. There's the office has been shrinking, so we need to have a comprehensive plan going forward to put all of this into place in a manner that allows you to add the staff at a reasonable rate over time.
Ms. Davies, the last word.
Last word. I'll try to keep it brief because we're going a good round on this. But it's required by law that we do the mandate. So having prepared that annual mandate evaluation, we have to do it. It's required by law unless it changes, unless the legislature changes that. We are also going to need to keep ensuring that all the components required for the statewide financial reporting are done. And it's very comprehensive. It includes component units that are out there that need to have their financial audit done and brought into the statewide financials, and then there's audit procedures that need done. The single audit that we talked about that's mandated by the United States O&B Office of Management and Budget, that has to be done annually. From there, you have to look at what tips come in and then do a risk assessment and decide how you're going to deal with those issues and get to them in a cost-effective manner. And that's really the bottom line. And it's agreed, we all agree that there's limited resources in the office and we need to build the office up. So with what's left, we'll do what we can as you move forward annually.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Next question comes from John Stark. Williams.
I would hope that everyone comes together after the primary and supports the candidates, the winner of this race. Ms. Stacy?
I would just like to continue on being, having an expectation that people would allow me to present my background, and if they choose to support, and I would be supportive. I continue doing what I'm doing. I believe everyone has a right to run for office. I would continue to be supportive and professional and respect people's opinions and positions, and I think that's how it should be even during the primary.
Mr. Gibbs?
The Democratic way is everybody lobbies and gets behind the person who wins the primary, and that's how it should be. That's what I would hope to be. I would sit down with both candidates here and pick their brain and want to know their perspectives and as much information I believe I like to gather as much as I can. It helps me make better decisions and have some thoughtful, meaningful conversations, because we've been seeing each other quite a bit every week, and we've only gotten to know each other one way. So I would welcome their expertise and any information and perspective they would want to share, and I hope they get behind me.
And I would welcome theirs when I win.
Ms. Davis?
I'm fine with it. I'd be open and welcoming to having pleasant dialogue and be supportive.
Thank you very much. Next question comes from Angie Watkins, and it reads, other than political and professional involvement, what organizations have you worked with to improve the lives of the people of Delaware? Ms. Davis?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of that?
Yes. Other than political and professional involvement, what organizations have you worked with to improve the lives of people in Delaware?
One of the organizations that I've been very supportive of is Habitat for Humanity. There's also a number of shelters in Delaware that I've been supportive of and actually quite mindful of, particularly in the winter months, where it becomes very problematic for those that are homeless. I'm a very large supporter of Tots for Toys, or Toys for Tots, whatever the name of that is, and as well as sponsoring families that are in need at the holidays. And I think that's more prevalent than you might realize. As well as it's my professional background, but I have offered and volunteered and conducted various trainings that I'm entitled to do that, so that's part of my background as well, for any not-for-profit group, because I do have not-for-profit accounting, and then I also have the internal control background as well, so I do volunteer my time that way.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Yes.
Well, what I can think of right now, again, I was a driver about 20 years ago for Meals on Wheels, and I currently serve on the board and fundraise for them. I'm on the fundraising committee for several entities, and a lot of it's crossover, Rehoboth Main Street, former Rehoboth homeowners, Camp Rehoboth, which is Create a More Positive Rehoboth, and it's for LGBTQ community, but we actually get the largest amount of flu shots, believe it or not, down there. West Side New Beginnings, West Rehoboth New Beginnings. I've always, my children and I, gather gently used clothes. We also try and do it monthly to Stubbs Elementary up on the east side, in Wilmington, Hicks Anderson. So we've taken bicycles up there. I mean, anything statewide, races to run. If I can volunteer, if I can do a water stop for the Ronald McDonald House. I'm over volunteered. I need some kind of sign. But I'm also a member and have been for about 13 years straight for the Delaware Medical Reserve Board. And for example, I'll drive probably the furthest than anyone, let's say to Middletown, and spend a few hours and give out potassium iodide, which is preventative, precautionary. So you name it, I'll do it. But I'm learning to say no and not jump on many more committees. Planned Parenthood, I've been on the front lines. So I've been a driver since I was 16. So I had a large volunteerism part, if you will.
Thank you. Mr. Williams?
I've been involved in primary primarily two areas. One, the Civil Air Patrol, and the other is a group of various arts organizations. My time in the Civil Air Patrol actually started there as a teenager and learned to fly right up the road in Smyrna Airport. But it is an organization, the Auditor of the Air Force, that deals with training teenagers, cadets in leadership and aerospace education, emergency services, search and rescue, and general leadership skills. So my job there after, aging out at 21 was to lead a squadron of teenagers and be a mentor and help that organization grow as well, and helping to train the next generation of leaders. My other involvement has been in a lot of performing arts organizations as a volunteer, as a board member, and I do that for a couple of reasons. One is I think it's really critical to our society to promote the arts, both outside and in the schools, because it provides for a well-rounded society, but it's also a very big economic driver in this state. And it is the anchor of a lot of economic development that is going on here. So I was involved with that as a legislator to make sure that we have the adequate funding for that. So it is really, it also helps attract new businesses to the state, because new companies looking for a place to go are looking for that cultural environment. So I've been on the boards, I've been a volunteer, I'm still a volunteer. I've been asked to be on boards, but once again, as a candidate for auditor, let alone if I'm elected, I am not serving on the board of any organization because they can get funds from the state, and that would once again be a conflict of interest.
Mr. Geddes, response.
You remind me, and the Rehoboth are in clear space, and I do something up and down the state, and I try and do in different counties to get a different perspective, but I love doing principal for the day, different school districts, and you can compare and contrast what's going on there. I have found that so rewarding and very valuable. Thank you.
Okay. Our last question before we have closing remarks comes from Will Garfunkel. How can any state auditor be truly independent without an independent source of funding, insulated from the joint financial committee? Beginning with yes.
I understand, but that's how you're going to get your resources and hopefully sell that you have the plan, the will, the drive, and the capability and competency to be able to take this office to the next step. That's how it works. If we have to change something legislatively where we're going to go get funds, we can do that as well. But I think you can be truly independent if you are of that nature and that character, and your record will show it, and your results will show it, and your personality and what you've done, and what you've stood for, and how you've done it. It's not. Look at the records. Look at the real life experiences. Look at people have that. You're not necessarily not independent because you have an endorsement. The office is not necessarily not independent because they're going to JFC and looking for funding. The state is not going to be improving or be on that trajectory because there are some issues going out there with the pathways and where we are with some of the finances unless this office is fully functioning. And I think it's going to cost a little bit of money in the beginning, but I don't think we can't afford not to go to JFC and fight for this office.
Mr. Williams.
It is a bit of a challenge. I would look at how it is done in other states and municipalities. One suggestion is to tie the funding to a percentage of the operating budget. That's what we do with the bond bill. With the amount of bonds, the amount of borrowing that you can do in the state is 5% of the general fund in any given year. That's the math. Where there's a certain amount of funds that goes based on the budget itself, that would provide some independence. But I believe that the importance of independence and showing that the office is independent, once again, comes from being completely independent of any of the legislators who are involved in this process and of the governor. and of other agency heads, such as the insurance commissioner. You need to be independent there, because then people will see that you are making those decisions based on the law and on the accounting standards and the rules.
Ms. Davis?
There are two funding sources for the auditor of account staffing. One is from the general fund and one is from the special fund. The special fund is determined by a cost recovery methodology. So that is separate from the Joint Finance Committee. It's the level of positions that you're funded to, and we've always had ample funds in the special fund. They need to be used for particular types of engagement. Although currently under government accounting standards, people aren't held quite so stringently to how money's brought in and then how it's used. But coming from traditional budgetary background, the special fund means that you use it for specific purposes that you bring the money in for. So that's traditionally been honored as long as I was at the auditor's office. The general fund has consistently been funded, but as I said, it's common knowledge whether you're appointed as a state auditor or whether you're elected. That is a place where they can come back if you displease someone or you audit an area, and that's something you need to be prepared for. And so you'll have to respond budgetarily. That's where it's important to be able to plan forward. And in some cases, you have to just deal with those publicly or report out what's happening and represent that to Joint Finance Committee. As of my tenure here, that has not been an issue. They have not cut the appropriation budget. There's been ample funding for contract audit work as well.
Mr. Williams?
Yeah, one quick point. I think that by making the office more relevant, by making the reports more visible, I would hold quarterly public meetings to talk about these reports and to allow people to see the value and the independence and the results that we are getting from the office. And I think it's a way to drive the demand for these resources from the public, because the Joint Finance Committee not only reviews what's submitted by the governor and by the department heads, but they are also very responsive to what the public says. These are public hearings, and the auditor works for all of you, for the public. So I believe that if the auditor's office has a higher profile and we get people engaged, then they should be encouraged to testify at these public hearings, to demand that the auditor's office has an adequate level of funding.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. You are one incredible audience. All of you. For 2 hours, you stuck with us, delving into the minutiae of a public office that has no constituency at all except for the people who want to be involved in the process. With that, I'd like to ask for closing remarks, and Ms. Davy, is your first one.
Okay, thank you. And yes, I'm really pleased to see that everybody's still awake too. That's wonderful. So I'll keep my remarks brief, although 2 minutes does go fast. We've talked really sufficiently about staffing. We're all in agreement. It's important to get the complement and make sure that we have people that have the right background and qualifications, make sure that they want to come in and do public service. I also want to reiterate that the mandates, that until the mandates are changed, that they need to be caught up and current, and we also can ensure that they're as relevant as possible. And there is opportunity for that. And we had worked on a lot of the mandates that are out there by talking to legislators and sharing with them where we're going with things, and some of the constituents out there that have come in and said that they'd like more information about school districts. So we're combining and merging those things, so I think that's important. And then the follow-up on the findings. As we talked about, the auditor has no enforcement power, so it is going to be important. And I don't think the resistance is in management in the agencies and departments. There seems to be more at the upper level, and that's where the communication needs to be had, is with those that are in the decision-making process, and convincing them, if at all possible, that the recommendations are viable by getting those people on staff that support some of those recommendations. And we have had instances where staff and secretaries at the time have agreed that there should be a change. One of them deals with means-tested entitlement programs, which I hope to be able to follow up on that and make sure that we get closer to a one-stop shopping for those that are entitled to these means-tested programs, so that they can go in and they don't have to travel all over when they don't have the resources to do that. So those are some of the things that we hope to follow up on that I'd like to pick up with. I'm also very appreciative of the opportunity during this process to go out and talk to people and realize that there are a lot of specific concerns in areas of Delaware that may not be concerns to the general population, but in one area or another. And I think that's very important. This is an opportunity. There's definitely going to be a new state auditor, and this is an opportunity for Delaware, and I'm very excited about that and hope to utilize my background and professionalism to be the ultimate leader of the office and make those decisions and talk to the Delawareans and see what their needs and requirements are. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Thank you for the moderators, the questions, for all of you for being here for this time and listening to us talk about the most exciting office in the state of Delaware. It is one that can be, and in a little over a month, we will have the Democratic primary to choose the Democrat who can best represent all of you and work for all of you for the next 4 years in this office. It's the first time we've had an open seat in 30 years. It's an office that has not been run well for the past 30 years and is allowed to dwindle. We need to take this to the next level and to make this office work for everybody in this state. Not just Sussex County or Kent County or Newcastle County, but for the entire state. And we need someone to do that who has the background and experience. My argument from the beginning is that this office requires someone who knows auditing, who knows accounting, who knows state government, and who knows best practices and methodologies from the private sector. As a Democrat, I know that government has a role to play in our lives. Government is not a business, but it can be run in many ways like a business and be more efficient. And so that is the experience from outside of the world of strictly state government auditing that I bring to this. It is a perspective that I bring from the nonprofit sector. It is a perspective that I bring from U.S. government auditing and from working in a variety of organizations and working with auditors for my career. It is a perspective I bring serving as a state legislator, being on the other side of that table, of developing the budget, of reading the budget, of helping to write the budget, and understanding not only the budget, but the accounting processes of this state. It is a perspective that I've gotten from talking to hundreds of people up and down the state over these past few months who are concerned about the inefficiencies and the fraud, waste, and abuse in our state government and how we can be doing better so that we have the money and can save the money to put into education and grant and aid and public safety and all those things that as Democrats we value. It is critically important to be effective in this job, that you be independent, because you need the trust and the confidence of the people of this state. And that is why I hold myself out as the independent Democrat in this race, not beholden to anyone, only beholden to the people of Delaware. So I ask for your support and your vote. Thank you.
Ms. McGinnis.
Well, I'm very excited. I am more excited because when I started this, I came out of the gate with this office is more than just numbers. This can be a relevant office. We have an opportunity, and I'm starting to hear that echo, and I'm excited. So I believe that it is, change is hard, and we're going to have change. But this is an opportunity to have fresh eyes, take a fresh approach, and bring somebody with a tireless work ethic and a perspective. And I will be tough, fair, and independent, and I will fight, because at the end of the day, this office must mean something to every Delawarean. If you don't want your taxes to go up and you don't want your services to go down, then this office does matter. And it is going to be definitely a higher profile if I get in. I will make sure there's outreach and transparency and listening and perspectives that can come in. It's not just what I know or the people in the office, but how we can work together, how we can work in partnerships, and how we can look at what's been done, what can we follow up on, and how can we move forward in the future. Instead of looking through the rearview mirror, let's all start looking through the windshield and move forward. Because again, as I've said before, and those who know me and know the results I get and the tireless work ethic, and I am a fighter, that I am not looking for a job, I'm looking to do a job, and that is for you, and that is service. And please consider me on September 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGinnis, and thank you all for coming. Now, I want to say one thing. Well, this was exciting.